Before you scroll away, let me warn you, this is not the kind of video that makes you feel comfortable. It's the kind that quietly exposes what most men never realize until it's too late. Because if you've ever wondered why some men seem to grow more attractive with time while others fade into invisibility, the answer has nothing to do with looks, money, or luck. It has everything to do with psychology. And once you hear this, you won't be able to unsee it. Most men are chasing attention, validation, and approval, thinking that's what attraction is built on. But the men who truly understand women aren't chasing at all. They're being watched. They're being felt. They're being chosen, often without ever asking. And the reason is uncomfortable, because it forces you to look at who you are when no one is applauding you. Here's the truth nobody says out loud. Women are not turned on by effort. They are turned on by inner structure, by emotional calm, by self-respect, by a man who doesn't bend himself out of shape to be liked. And that's why age, when combined with wisdom, becomes an advantage instead of a weakness. In this video, you're going to hear things that go against everything you've been told about attraction. You'll realize why trying harder often makes things worse, why being available all the time kills desire, why silence can be more powerful than words, and why the moment you stop needing to be chosen, you start becoming unforgettable. If you're ready to stop guessing, stop performing, and stop repeating the same patterns that never work, stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to understand doesn't just change how women see you, it changes how you see yourself. Let's talk about emotional self-control, because this is where attraction is either silently created or quietly destroyed, long before any words are spoken. Most men never realize this. They think attraction lives in what you say, how you look, or how much attention you give. But attraction actually lives in how you regulate yourself when nothing is guaranteed. A woman is always watching how you handle uncertainty, pressure, and silence. Not consciously at first, but instinctively. And instincts are brutally honest. Emotional self-control does not mean emotional suppression. It doesn't mean being cold, distant, or unavailable. It means you are not owned by your impulses. You don't react just because you feel something. You choose your response. And that choice is what signals maturity. When a man can feel desire without desperation, interest without anxiety, and disappointment without collapse, it communicates something powerful. This man has an inner structure. Most men reveal their inner chaos very early. They over-explain because they're afraid of being misunderstood. They over-text because silence feels like rejection. They over-invest because they fear being replaced. And without realizing it, they place emotional pressure on the woman. Not through words, but through energy. She feels responsible for their mood. She senses that her responses determine their emotional state. And the moment a woman feels responsible for regulating a man's emotions, attraction begins to die. Responsibility is not romantic, it's exhausting. Now contrast that with a man who remains emotionally steady. He doesn't rush to fill gaps. He doesn't panic when replies are delayed. He doesn't seek reassurance disguised as conversation. His calm is not performative, it's rooted. When something doesn't go his way, he doesn't dramatize it. He observes, adjusts, and moves forward. This creates a psychological effect that is deeply attractive, emotional safety combined with unpredictability. She knows he's stable, but she also knows he's not easily swayed. This is where older men often stand out, not because of age, but because life has humbled them. They've lost things. They've been disappointed. They've survived rejection without it defining them. And that history shows up in how they carry themselves. There's less urgency in their movements, less need to prove, less hunger for validation. And paradoxically, that lack of hunger is what makes them desirable. Wanting less gives you more power. From a psychological perspective, emotional self-control signals high self-esteem and low neuroticism, two traits consistently linked to long-term attraction. But beyond psychology, there's a deeper philosophical layer. A man who can regulate himself is a man who has accepted reality. He understands that he cannot control outcomes, only conduct. He doesn't attach his identity to being chosen, and that detachment creates freedom. He can show interest without attachment, affection without possession, and desire without neediness. Women respond to this not because it's strategic, but because it feels rare. Most interactions today are emotionally noisy. People are reactive, overstimulated, and desperate to be seen. When a woman encounters a man who is emotionally quiet on the inside, it stands out. His presence slows the room down. Conversations feel grounded. Tension feels intentional, not chaotic, and she may not be able to articulate why she feels drawn to him, but her nervous system recognizes stability. There's another uncomfortable truth here. Emotional self-control also means being okay with loss. The man who is most attractive is not the one who is trying hardest to keep a woman, but the one who knows he will be fine if she leaves. This doesn't make him indifferent. It makes him honest. He doesn't negotiate his standards out of fear. He doesn't tolerate disrespect to avoid abandonment. And that self-respect quietly commands respect in return. This is why emotional self-control is foundational. Without it, purpose collapses into obsession. Restraint turns into manipulation. Leadership becomes control. And confidence becomes performance. But with it, everything else stabilizes. Your words carry weight because they are not rushed. Your silence carries meaning because it is not empty. Your interest feels genuine because it is not desperate. So if you want to develop this trait, stop asking how to control others and start asking how to regulate yourself. Learn to sit with discomfort without reacting. Learn to let moments breathe without forcing direction. Learn to feel emotion without letting it hijack your behavior. This is not about becoming less human. It's about becoming more conscious. And here's the final thought to sit with. The man who controls his emotions does not need to chase attraction. Attraction comes to him because calm is rare and rarity is powerful. Now let's move into the second trait, because this is where attraction stops being accidental and starts becoming inevitable. A man with a purpose that existed before a woman ever entered his life operates from a completely different psychological position. He is not trying to be interesting. He is interesting because his life is already moving somewhere. And movement is attractive. Direction is attractive. A man who knows where he's going doesn't need to convince anyone to follow him. Most men misunderstand purpose. They think it has to be dramatic or impressive. A title, a bank balance, a public achievement. But purpose is not about status. It's about orientation. It's the quiet certainty that your life has a direction independent of external validation. When a man wakes up knowing what matters to him, how he wants to grow, and what he's building over time, his energy shifts. He's not scanning the room for approval. He's not adjusting himself to fit someone else's expectations. He's anchored. Psychologically, this matters because attraction thrives in polarity. When a man has no internal direction, he looks to a woman to provide meaning, motivation, or emotional fuel. And that immediately reverses the dynamic. She becomes the center, and he becomes the satellite. That imbalance creates pressure. She feels watched, needed, leaned on. And even if she enjoys the attention at first, it eventually feels heavy. Desire does not survive under the weight of responsibility. Now contrast that with a man whose purpose is already alive. He has routines. He has long-term goals. He has something he's refining, building, or mastering. When a woman enters that life, she doesn't feel like she has to inspire him or save him or complete him. She feels invited, and invitation is intoxicating. It tells her, I want you here, but I don't need you to exist. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Older men often embody this not because of age, but because time has forced clarity. When you've chased empty goals and felt the disappointment, you begin to ask better questions. What's worth my energy? What am I willing to suffer for? What kind of life do I respect? And once those answers form, you stop drifting. Your decisions become cleaner. Your standards become firmer. And women sense that alignment immediately. Alignment creates trust. Trust creates attraction. From a philosophical angle, a man with purpose has made peace with delayed gratification. He's not living for constant stimulation. He's willing to endure boredom, discomfort, and solitude in service of something meaningful. That ability to delay pleasure is deeply masculine and deeply rare in a culture addicted to immediacy. When a woman sees a man who can say no to short-term indulgence because he's committed to a longer vision, she sees strength. Not loud strength. Quiet, reliable strength. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. A man with purpose is not emotionally volatile. His mood is not dependent on romantic outcomes. If a date goes well, great. If it doesn't, his life continues. His sense of self remains intact. That emotional independence removes pressure from interactions. Conversations feel lighter, moments feel freer, and paradoxically, the less he needs the interaction to go a certain way, the more likely it is to go well. This is why women often say they're attracted to men who are busy, but not in a chaotic way. Busy with intention, engaged with life, focused on growth. Not running from loneliness, but choosing discipline. Purpose acts like a gravitational field. It organizes your time, your energy, and your priorities. And when your life is organized, people feel safer stepping into it. Let's be honest about something uncomfortable. When a man makes a woman the center of his universe too early, he's not being romantic. He's being avoidant of his own development. He's outsourcing meaning. And women can sense that, even if they can't articulate it. What feels flattering at first quickly becomes constricting. Attraction fades because there's no space to move, no direction to lean into. A man with purpose creates space naturally. His life is full, but not crowded. There is room for connection without suffocation. He doesn't cancel his principles for attention. He doesn't abandon his path for approval. And because of that, when he chooses to give time, presence, or commitment, it feels valuable. Scarcity created by discipline is far more attractive than availability created by emptiness. So the question isn't, how do I become more attractive? The question is, what am I building when no one is watching? Because purpose is not performative. It doesn't need an audience. It reveals itself in consistency, not announcements. And when your life has direction, attraction stops being something you chase and starts being something that follows. Here's the reflection to take with you. A woman doesn't want to be your purpose. She wants to walk beside a man who already has one. Now let's talk about masculine restraint, because this is the point where most attraction is either deepened or destroyed without anyone realizing why. Restraint is not about holding back because you're afraid. It's about choosing not to overextend because you understand timing, value, and consequence. In a world where everyone overshares, overtexts, and overexplains, restraint feels almost revolutionary. And that's exactly why it works. Most men believe attraction grows through constant presence, more messages, more availability, more reassurance. They think if they just stay visible enough, they'll stay relevant. But psychologically, desire doesn't work like that. Desire needs space. It needs uncertainty. It needs the feeling that something is forming but not fully accessible yet. When everything is immediately available, the nervous system relaxes too quickly and interest fades. Masculine restraint is the ability to resist the urge to collapse distance too fast. It's not playing games, it's respecting the natural rhythm of connection. When a man responds instead of reacts, when he speaks with intention instead of impulse, he signals confidence. He's not trying to lock the moment down. He's allowing it to unfold. And that patience creates tension, the kind that keeps someone mentally engaged long after the interaction ends. You can see the absence of restraint very clearly. A man sends a message and immediately checks his phone. He explains himself before he's even been questioned. He fills silence with unnecessary words. And what he's really saying, without meaning to, is, "I'm afraid of losing your attention." That fear leaks into behavior. And fear, no matter how polite it sounds, is not attractive. An older man who understands restraint moves differently. He doesn't need to narrate his interest. It's felt. He doesn't rush intimacy, emotionally or physically. He allows curiosity to build. He lets a woman wonder what he's thinking instead of spelling it out too early. This doesn't create insecurity. It creates intrigue. Because intrigue is not confusion. Intrigue is the space between what is known and what is sensed. From a psychological perspective, restraint activates anticipation. Anticipation is one of the strongest drivers of attraction. The mind enjoys filling in gaps. When everything is explained, the mind shuts down. When something is left unsaid, the mind leans in. That's why restraint is powerful. It lets the other person participate emotionally instead of just consuming what's being offered. There's also a philosophical layer here that matters deeply. Restraint is evidence of self-mastery. A man who cannot restrain himself is not free. He's governed by impulse, craving, and external validation. A man who can pause, who can choose when and how to express himself, demonstrates inner authority. And inner authority is the foundation of masculine presence. This is where many men confuse restraint with emotional withdrawal. They think being distant makes them attractive. It doesn't. Absence without intention feels cold. Restraint with presence feels strong. You can be warm, engaged, and interested without being excessive. You can show desire without urgency. The difference is whether your behavior is driven by choice or by anxiety. Restraint also protects you. It keeps you from overinvesting before trust is built. It allows you to observe rather than project. When you don't rush, you see people more clearly. You notice patterns. You recognize whether interest is mutual or one-sided. That clarity prevents disappointment and resentment. And a man who respects himself enough to move at a measured pace naturally earns respect from others. Women are especially sensitive to this. They notice when a man can sit comfortably in silence, when he doesn't try to entertain or impress every second. When he allows moments to breathe, those pauses are not empty. They're charged. They communicate confidence, comfort, and emotional strength. And strength that doesn't need to announce itself is always compelling. In a culture that rewards immediacy, restraint feels counterintuitive. But attraction is not built by speed, it's built by depth. Depth requires time. It requires allowing feelings to develop organically instead of forcing intensity. When you restrain yourself, you're saying, "I trust the process." And trust is magnetic, so if you want to cultivate this trait, start by noticing your impulses. The urge to reply instantly, the urge to clarify too much, the urge to secure reassurance. Pause instead. Ask yourself whether the action is necessary or simply comforting your anxiety. Over time, that pause becomes power, and that power changes how you're perceived. Here's the thought to carry with you. A man who can restrain himself doesn't chase desire, he creates the space where desire grows. Now let's talk about emotional leadership, because this is where attraction stops being accidental and starts feeling inevitable. Emotional leadership is not about control, dominance, or telling someone what to do. It's about clarity. It's about being the person in the interaction who knows where they stand, what they want, and what they will not tolerate, and expressing that without anger, fear, or apology. Most people underestimate how rare this is, and rarity creates value. Many men believe leadership means taking charge externally, but emotional leadership is internal first. It starts with knowing yourself well enough that you don't outsource decisions to other people's reactions. When a man lacks this, he becomes emotionally reactive. He adjusts his boundaries based on fear of loss. He says yes when he means no. He tolerates behavior that quietly erodes his self-respect. And the moment a woman senses that a man doesn't trust his own judgment, she unconsciously stops trusting him with hers. Emotional leadership shows up in small, almost invisible moments. It's how you respond when plans change. It's how you handle disagreement. It's how you communicate disappointment without hostility. A man who can say calmly and clearly, "That doesn't work for me," without needing to justify or dramatize it, sends a powerful message. He's not trying to win. He's not trying to punish. He's simply stating reality. And that grounded honesty creates psychological safety. From a psychological perspective, people are drawn to those who reduce uncertainty. Emotional ambiguity creates anxiety. When someone doesn't know where they stand, their nervous system stays alert. A man who leads emotionally removes that confusion. He doesn't send mixed signals. He doesn't hint and hope. He communicates directly, but without pressure. That balance is deeply attractive because it allows a woman to relax into the interaction rather than constantly interpret it. This is where many men go wrong. They confuse leadership with rigidity or control. True emotional leadership is flexible, not fragile. It can adapt without collapsing. An emotionally leading man can hear criticism without becoming defensive. He can hold his position without needing to overpower someone else's. He doesn't escalate to prove strength. He lets strength speak through consistency, and consistency builds trust. There's also a philosophical layer here that's important. Emotional leadership means accepting responsibility for your inner world. You don't blame others for how you feel. You don't demand that someone behave a certain way so you can remain calm. You regulate yourself first. That self-regulation gives you authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your choices. And people naturally follow those who are self-directed. Older men often embody this trait more naturally because life has taught them the cost of emotional chaos. They've seen what happens when boundaries are unclear. They've experienced relationships where resentment replaced respect. And they've learned that peace is not maintained by avoidance, but by honest structure. When you can create structure emotionally, relationships become simpler, not harder. Women are especially sensitive to this because emotional leadership allows them to stay in their feminine energy without becoming anxious or guarded. When a man can say, "This is where I stand," she doesn't have to guess. Guessing is exhausting. Clarity is calming. And calm allows attraction to deepen rather than burn out. There's an important distinction to make here. Emotional leadership is not about always being right. It's about being real. You can admit uncertainty without surrendering direction. You can say, "I don't know yet, but I'll decide." And that still feels grounding. What matters is that you don't disappear into indecision or people-pleasing. You remain present and accountable. This trait also protects you from resentment. When you don't lead emotionally, you end up agreeing to situations you don't actually want. Over time, that creates frustration, passive aggression, or withdrawal. Emotional leadership prevents that because you address misalignment early, calmly, and respectfully. And when a woman sees that you're willing to risk discomfort for honesty, she knows she's dealing with a man who values integrity over approval. Leadership is attractive because it signals competence, not just in relationships, but in life. If you can manage emotional complexity without drama, it suggests you can handle pressure, responsibility, and uncertainty elsewhere too. Attraction doesn't live in words. It lives in what your behavior consistently communicates. So if you want to develop emotional leadership, stop asking how to control outcomes and start asking how to express truth cleanly. Learn to say what you mean without emotional charge. Learn to hold boundaries without hostility. Learn to lead with calm instead of intensity. Over time, this changes how people respond to you because you're no longer reacting to the moment. You're shaping it. Here's the reflection to leave you with. A man who leads emotionally doesn't demand trust. He creates it by being clear enough to follow, Now we arrive at the fifth trait, and in many ways, this is the foundation beneath everything else. Internal validation is the quiet force that separates men who are magnetic from men who are merely trying. It is the difference between confidence that can be shaken and confidence that cannot be touched. And most people never develop it because they confuse being liked with being worthy. Internal validation means your sense of value does not rise and fall based on how someone responds to you. It means you don't need constant reassurance to feel steady. You don't look to another person to confirm that you matter, that you're enough, or that you're on the right path. This doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you anchored. And anchored people are rare in a world addicted to approval. Most men are externally validated without realizing it. They feel good when they're praised and anxious when they're ignored. They feel confident when they're desired and insecure when they're questioned. Their emotional state is constantly negotiated through other people's reactions. And while this is human, it becomes a problem when your identity depends on it. Because the moment your worth is negotiable, attraction becomes unstable. A man with internal validation moves differently. Compliments don't inflate him. Criticism doesn't collapse him. Interest is appreciated, not needed. Rejection is processed, not personalized. This emotional independence sends a powerful signal. It says, I know who I am, even if you don't choose me. And that certainty is deeply attractive because it removes emotional pressure from the interaction. From a psychological standpoint, internal validation reflects secure self-esteem. Secure self-esteem is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to dominate conversations or prove superiority. It's calm. It's consistent. It allows a man to be present without performing. And presence without performance is rare. When a woman senses that you're not trying to extract something from her, approval, attention, validation, she can relax. And relaxation is where attraction grows. There's also a philosophical depth here that matters. Internal validation comes from living in alignment with your values. When your actions match your principles, you don't need applause. You respect yourself. And self-respect changes everything. It influences how you speak, what you tolerate, and what you walk away from. A man who respects himself does not beg for connection. He offers it freely, without attachment to outcome. This is where older men often stand out, not because they've mastered life, but because they've learned what doesn't work. They've chased validation and felt how empty it is. They've tried to please everyone and watched themselves disappear in the process. And eventually, something shifts. They realize that peace comes from approval you give yourself. That realization is transformative. It stabilizes your emotions, it sharpens your boundaries, and it quietly elevates your presence. Internal validation also protects you from manipulation. When you don't need external approval, flattery loses its power. So does withdrawal. You don't overcompensate when someone pulls away. You don't chase when attention fades. You don't abandon your standards to regain favor. That steadiness creates respect. And respect is the soil where attraction takes root. There's an important distinction to make here. Internal validation does not mean emotional isolation. It doesn't mean you don't care what others think. It means you care selectively. Feedback is considered, not absorbed. Opinions are heard, not internalized. You remain open without becoming porous. That balance is maturity. And maturity is attractive because it signals reliability. Many men believe confidence comes from success, status, or experience. Those things can help, but they are not the source. Confidence comes from self-trust, from knowing that you can handle discomfort, from believing that you will be okay, even if things don't go your way. When a woman senses that you trust yourself, she instinctively trusts you more. Not because you're perfect, but because you're grounded. This trait also changes how you show up in relationships. You don't seek completion. You seek connection. You don't need someone to fill a void. You want someone to share a full life with. That difference is subtle but powerful. A woman can feel when she's being chosen versus when she's being used to stabilize someone's identity. One feels honoring, the other feels draining. If you want to cultivate internal validation, start by keeping promises to yourself. Do what you say you'll do, even when no one is watching. Build a life you respect. Make decisions you can stand behind. Over time, that integrity becomes self-worth, and self-worth becomes confidence that doesn't need an audience. Let this final thought stay with you. When your value comes from within, no one can take it from you, and the man who cannot be shaken is the man who is quietly desired.